Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be looking at the mainline Dragon Sicilian after e4, c5, knight of 3, d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, bishop e3. We're going to go into this mainline Dragon. White's going to castle. We're going to have this early queen a5, bishop b3. We're going to bring the f rook to c8. We're going to have king b1, and we're going to have knight e5, h4. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, hit that subscribe button, click on your notification icon. So the primary scope of this video is to cover how we're going to meet this move king b1, which is a safety move that white tends to play to kind of safeguard his a2 pawn and a lot of different variations where that a2 pawn could become loose. And it's also just a general safety move where the king can even run to a1 in the future and you can shuffle the rook to b1 and basically just safeguard the queen side in general. How do we meet this move? What's the best way to meet it? And what are some things that white can try? So one main line is white can try the move knight to c4 here. I've never been a huge fan of that. White seems to get a very slight edge without having to put a whole lot of effort into the position. So my personal preference is to play this move rook on a to b8 and just basically play a waiting move. So for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to be covering absolutely every single line here because there are quite a few of them. I'm going to try to cover some more of these lines in maybe another video. But for the purposes of this video, we're just going to be covering what do we do if we play pawn to h5 as white in this position, and what do we do if at some point white decides to try to cash out and play the move knight to d5. So all of these lines are pretty fascinating, so let's just go ahead and dive into the first one. So we're going to have pawn to h5. Now here, one of the main ideas behind rook a b8 is we make this waiting move so that we can respond to pawn to h5 much in the same way that we would have responded to it with the king on c1. We can sacrifice the exchange on c3, and then if they exchange queens, like queen c3, bc3, we simply snap this pawn on the h5 square, and we have a pawn for the exchange, and we have very good endgame chances. Those positions are considered equal, but I've always preferred black. I always thought those positions were maybe even slight edge black. So we're going to have bc3, we're going to have knight h5, and then here we're going to have white continue his attack kind of in the normal way. We're going to have this move pawn to g4. Now, in this case, I recommend the same move that I do in the king c1 positions, which is the move knight to g3, attacking that rook on h1, and then we're going to have the move rook to h3. Now, once again, much like in the king c1 positions, we're going to have two different possibilities here. Black can simply cash out and take some material. He can play knight takes e4, fe4, and then snap this exchange. And we end up with a material imbalance where black has some extra pawns and white has an extra piece. And this should level out. Black should have enough compensation for the piece just in the form of the extra pawns that he has and the extra activity that he has. So, after a move like knight g4, this position should just be considered unclear, and everybody should have chances in this position. This position is fine. But possibly an even more viable option in this position, and I mean even more viable than in the positions where the white king is on c1, is the move knight takes f3. Now, I'll actually play this move knight takes f3 even with the king on c1. I tend to believe in these positions, even against best play. Now, of course, the really appealing thing about this move knight takes f3 is all the quick wins you get when people play knight takes f3. After knight takes f3, knight takes e4 is, of course, winning, and it's just as winning in this line as it is in the lines with the king on c1. So after knight takes e4, we're going to have, something like queen h2, knight takes c3, king c1 takes, bishop g4 is decisive position black, pretty much game over. We can just go ahead and call this a day. Everybody can go home. So that's really tempting, just the fact that a lot of people will play knight f3 in this position, and you can win the game very quickly with knight takes e4. Now, the absolute best move is queen g2. Now, in the lines with the king on c1, these lines are very, very complicated, and if everybody plays perfect chess, if everybody has home preparation and they all play perfect chess, you're going to end up in a weird situation where you have like a rook and 4 pawns for a queen, but black has like probably a fortress. In this situation, it actually ends up a little bit better. Black ends up with a lot of material for a rook, and he ends up with a lot of initiative for that material. Which should end in a perpetual check. So this is basically the line is we play knight takes e4, so same idea, queen f3, knight takes c3 check. And of course the big difference between this line and the other line is that we can take on c3 with check without having to move our queen. And apparently that's a critical difference in making this position just a little bit more playable for black than the other position. So we have king c1, we have rook f8, so it's basically the same sequence of moves, except we have a queen on a5 instead of having to throw in like a queen a3 check. So now we have rook on d2, h1. Knight a2 is supposed to be very good here. Bishop a2, queen a2. And here, apparently, even though black is down a whole rook, he has plenty of compensation for it in the form of a whole bunch of extra pawns and in the form of all of this activity that he's getting with his queen. So now after rook takes h7, we're going to have queen a3 check, king d2, queen b4 check, pawn to c3, queen b2 check, king d3, rook c8, and now bishop b5 check is going to be coming. We're going to have bishop d2, bishop b5 check, knight takes b5, queen takes b5, king d2, queen b2 piling up on the c3 square, and also, just threatening to bring more pieces into the attack. And now after something like, say, rook h2, we're going to bring this rook into the attack as well with rook c5, threatening rook e5. And at this point, white will actually have to cash out and sack some of that material back just so that he can start an attack that'll break through. He has to sack for this exchange, rook g7, king g7, queen h3, so that he can threaten mate. And now, since black has a mate threat on the table, he's getting mate threatened, he has to sack back and get the perpetual. So now he can cash out and just take this perpetual check. And that should be a draw. So that's kind of the wild, complicated, line, beginning with, g4, knight g3, rook g3, and then knight takes f3. And knight takes f3 should work. If you don't want a line that ends in perpetual, you can, of course, still cash out from the material in a different way. You can play knight takes e4, f takes e4, bishop takes g4, and then just rip one of these exchanges. And that is also an acceptable way to play this position. So I told you at the beginning of the video there was one other way that white could sort of try to play these positions. He could try to cash out in these positions and exchange queens. So he could play a move like knight d5 at some point and exchange queens. So I actually had two different international masters try this against me with varying success. I had international master Victor Adler try this against me, and I had international master John Bartholomew try this against me. This was all years ago. I forget exactly how many. It was probably more than a decade ago, if not more. So this was quite a long time ago. So Adler actually picked kind of the bad way to do it. He played g4 first, and then after b5 he started getting nervous about my attack, so he decided, well, I better go ahead and cash out with the move knight to d5. And this actually turns out to be very, very bad. Having this additional weakness on the f3 square is actually a big deal in these positions. So after queen d2, rook d2, knight d5, e d5, a5, white's position is already lost, apparently. After a3, a4, bishop a2, I played b4, ab, rook b4, and then he thought for a really long time here, because apparently his position is completely lost, like there isn't a great move here. Eventually he played king a1, and I snapped off this pawn. I played knight takes f3, which was a completely winning tactic. He doesn't have much of a choice here. He has to play knight takes f3, bishop takes b2, king b1, bishop d4, king c1, bishop takes e3 was a completely winning position for black. Another way that somebody tried to cash out with knight d5, and John Bartholomew wasn't the only person to do it. I've had a whole bunch of people try to cash out this way. Is a lot of people will try to cash out with this move bishop to g5. It is a much safer way to try to cash out. And in my game against John Bartholomew, I played b5. He cashed out with bishop f6. Bishop f6, knight d5 is the idea. Queen d2, knight takes f6, king g7, knight h5, gh5, rook d2. And I think we just agreed to a draw maybe one move after this, or it was either on this move or one move after this. We both kind of wanted a draw. It was a tournament situation type of thing. And I kind of regret taking these, I've taken a lot of draws in this type of position in the past, and if I could go back and take all those draws back, I probably would. I think black can play for a win in these positions. I think the position is objectively equal, but there is a lot to play for here. Black can play like a5, a4, b4. Much like in my game against Victor Adler, you can have this very, very similar plan where you expand on the queen side and you create these weaknesses, but there's almost no risk to black's position. Even though black has these doubled pawns aren't actually a weakness. If anything, they're a strength. At some point, the black king can get out of the way, and you can even attack along the g-file if you want to. Meanwhile, the only way that white is going to make any kind of progress is white is going to eventually have to push these pawns and maybe even trade off some of these doubled pawns. So these doubled pawns are not really a weakness in the position, and black is doing just fine. So in conclusion, the main way that we're going to be handling this king b1 idea is my main recommendation against king b1 is to play this waiting move to play rook a b8. That way we can meet h5 with rook takes c3, and then knight takes h5. And of course, we can meet these, cashing out ideas by simply advancing our queenside pawns against this poor bishop on b3, and those positions should be good for black as well. So I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.